نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد بسم الله. Today inshallah we will begin the tafsir of Surah Yaseen. Surah Yaseen is a Makki surah, 83 ayats and 5 ruku. And the name Yaseen comes from the beginning of the surah, which starts with these letters, Yaseen. And the connection of this surah with the previous surah, Surah Fatir, is that Surah Fatir mentions sending of a warner. And then in Surah Yaseen, we see that the surah begins with addressing Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam with an oath on the Quran that he's indeed among the messengers. So there's a warner mentioned in Surah Fatir, and then Surah Yaseen has an oath on Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam being the messenger. And then both surahs describe proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine power in the creation and operations of heavenly bodies in our cosmos. So in Surah Fatir, وَسَخَّرَ الشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ كُلٌّ يَجْرِي لِأَجَلٍ مُّسَمًّى. And then in Surah Yaseen, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍّ لَهَا ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْعَلِيمِ وَالْقَمَرَ قَدَّرْنَاهُ مَنَازِلَ حَتَّى عَادَ كَالْعُرْجُونِ الْقَدِيمِ. So a brief synopsis of the surah. This surah begins with an oath by Quran on the authenticity of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as the messenger. And then it describes two groups of people, those who ignored the guidance and others who feared their Lord. The surah refers to the salvation of a believer, so a particular incident, a believer by the name of Habib Najjar, who invited his people to follow Allah's messenger at his time, and then the consequences he faced afterwards. And also mentions the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to revive barren lands, to bring forth night and day in succession, and to establish the planetary system comprising of the sun and the moon. Surah Yaseen reminds us of the resurrection of people from graves and the gathering that will happen on the Day of Judgment. It depicts the blessings of paradise for believers and the burning of disbelievers in hellfire. It also declares the ultimate authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He could establish an order by issuing a command as simple as kun, and it happens fayakun. Such is the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some virtues of this surah. So a couple of narrations that come regarding the verses of Surah Yaseen. The first one in Tirmidhi Sharif, إِنَّ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَلْبًا وَقَلْبُ الْقُرْآنِ يَاسِينَ وَمَنْ قَرَأَ يَاسِينَ كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بِقِرَاءَتِهَا قِرَاءَةَ الْقُرْآنِ عَشْرَ مَرَّاتٍ. Indeed, for everything there is a heart. And the Qur'an's heart is Yaseen. Whoever recites Yaseen, then for its recitation, Allah writes for him that he recited the Quran 10 times. The other narration is in Sunan Abi Dawood, اقرأوا ياسين على موتاكم, recite Surah Yaseen over your dying men, as it comes in Sunan Abi Dawood. So there are other virtues in different narrations, but these are the two that we have discussed here. So let's move on to the tafsir of the surah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم. Yaseen, by the wise Quran. So the words Yaseen, the letters Yaseen, are among huruf muqatta'at, the broken letters, and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the true meaning of these letters. Some scholars consider it to be the name of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And when we look at verse number 3, إِنَّكَ لَمِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, which means indeed you are among the messengers, addressing Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it becomes clear that here it's actually addressing Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam with Yaseen, and Allah knows best. Wal-Qur'an al-Hakim. So Hakim means here al-Muhkam, that Quran is perfect and that no falsehood can enter Quran. إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم. Indeed you, O Muhammad, are from among the messengers on a straight path. This is a revelation of the exalted in might, the merciful. Sirat al-Mustaqim means طريق معتدل لا عوج فيه وهو الإسلام, a moderate path that is not crooked, meaning Islam. This verse reaffirms that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is indeed the messenger of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and that he is on the straight path. And this path is not something he has chosen himself. Rather, what he brings as religion is a pure and divine guidance to salvation from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And this Sirat al-Mustaqim is explicitly referred in another verse as Siratullah, meaning the path of Allah. So in Surah Shura, verses 52 and 53, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّكَ لَتَهْدِي إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ صِرَاطِ اللَّهِ الَّذِي لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ أَلَا إِلَى اللَّهِ تَصِيرُ الْأُمُورِ. And indeed, O Muhammad, you guide to a straight path, the path of Allah, to whom belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. Verily, all matters at the end go to Allah. لِتُنذِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنذِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. That you may warn a people whose forefathers were not warned, so they are unaware. Here, Qawm refers to Arabs who had not seen a prophet for several centuries after Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. So naturally, a question comes to mind at this point. Did we not learn in Surah Fatir that every nation had a warner? So in Surah Fatir, verse 24, وَإِن مِّنْ أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ. And there was no nation but that there had passed within it a warner. So how do you reconcile these two verses? Here, it becomes clear to us that Arabs did not see a prophet in a long time. And then in Surah Fatir, it mentions how every nation should have had a warner. So the way scholars explain is there could have been disciples of prophets and other pious people in every nation who reminded others of the teachings of their prophet. So here we understand that Nadir, that went to every nation, doesn't have to be a prophet. It could be someone pious or a follower of a prophet that was reminding others of the teachings at that time. So now there is no contradiction that Arabs did not see a prophet for a long time because they would have had seen warners along the way, which may not have been prophets. If it becomes clear to us now that Qawm refers to Arab, and then when we read the verse again, لِتُنذِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنذِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was sent to Arabs, then the question becomes, was he only sent to Arabs? What about the rest of the world? We get the answer in Surah A'raf, verse 158. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ جَمِيعًا. Say, O mankind, indeed I am the messenger of Allah to you all. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was sent as a messenger to the entire mankind. And then when this verse mentions Arabs as Qawm, it does not mean other people are excluded. It's just specifying Arabs in this verse. لَقَدْ حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ عَلَىٰ أَكْثَرِهِمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Already the word has come into effect upon most of them, so they do not believe. حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ means وَجَبَ الْعَذَابُ. The punishment is certain for most people. We learn in this verse and a few other verses that majority of the people will remain disbelievers. So it comes in Surah A'raf, verse number 102, وَمَا وَجَدْنَا لِأَكْثَرِهِمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ وَإِنْ وَجَدْنَا أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَفَاسِقِينَ. And most of them we found not true to their covenant, but we found most of them defiantly disobedient. And then in Surah Yusuf, verse number 102, وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. And most of the people, although you strive for it, are not believers. So we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed in Lawh Mahfuz who will be entering paradise and who will be entering the hellfire. And in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that most people are destined not to accept faith, and therefore they will bear the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So an obvious question here is, do we have a choice, or are we bound by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for us already? We look at a couple of verses to get our answer. In Surah Kahf, verse 29, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. And say, the truth is from your Lord. So whoever wills, let him believe, and whoever wills, let him disbelieve. So there is a choice. And then in Surah Dahr, verse number 3, إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. Indeed, we guided him to the way, be he grateful or be he ungrateful. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown us what is right and wrong. We could be thankful to him and believe in him, or we may choose to disbelieve and be ungrateful. And that is our other choice. So when we hear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already declared the final destination of everyone in Lawh Mahfuz, we should understand that it is based on his ultimate knowledge on who will accept the message and who will reject the guidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a clear choice to mankind, and he has shown us both ways to the salvation and ways to the punishment, and it is now up to the individual to select the right path. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا فِي أَعْنَاقِهِمْ أَغْلَالًا فَهِيَ إِلَى الْأَذْقَانِ فَهُمْ مُقْمَحُونَ وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سَدًّا فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. Indeed, we have put shackles on their necks, and they are to their chins, so they are with heads kept aloft. And we have put before them a barrier and behind them a barrier and covered them so they do not see. في أعناقهم أغلالا means جمعت أيديهم إلى أعناقهم. Their hands are tied to their necks. And then مقمحون means رافعون رؤوسهم لا يستطيعون خفضها, with raised heads such that they cannot lower them. Saddan means hajizan wa mani'an, something that blocks or is a barrier. And فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَأَعْمَيْنَا أَبْصَارَهُم, we blinded their sight. So there are a few analogies in these verses. People who disbelieve are like those whose hands are tied to their necks, so they cannot perform any good deed with their hands. And then their necks are facing upwards, so that they cannot see what is right in front of them and what path are they on. And what makes their situation even worse is that they seem to have barriers of ignorance around them. So even if the signs of guidance and truth are in their surroundings, they do not see these signs and they fail to accept the faith. Imam Razi, in his Tafseer, gives a very beautiful explanation of these two verses. He describes two types of barriers for disbelievers. The first barrier is what prevents them from seeing their own selves. And the second barrier is their inability to see their surroundings. The outcome is that they remain on a misguided path, and they're not able to take clues from their environment to course correct their actions. وَسَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And it is all the same for them whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. There are people in this world today who have gone so far in their misguidance that nothing can make them believe the truth and accept the faith of Islam. They're either heedless of their situation or overconfident on their viewpoint, or simply too arrogant and egoistic to change their perspective. The same situation existed in the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So no matter how many clear signs came to the people of Makkah, they did not believe. And even if they were sure of the Prophet of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in their hearts, they continued in their rejection out of the concern of their status in the society or the pride of their tribe or any other reason they conjectured at that point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here that it does not matter whether such people are warned of the consequence of their disbelief or not. They will never accept Islam. And we see this fact mentioned in another place in Surah Yunus, verses 96 and 97. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ حَقَّتْ عَلَيْهِمْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ وَلَوْ جَاءَتْهُمْ كُلُّ آيَةٍ حَتَّى يَرَوُا الْعَذَابَ الْأَلِيمَ. Indeed, those upon whom the word of your Lord has come into effect will not believe, even if every sign should come to them until they see the painful punishment. And once someone sees their end, they are approaching death, too late. There's no acceptance of forgiveness at that point. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. You can only warn one who follows the message and fears the most merciful unseen. So give him good tidings of forgiveness and a noble reward. Al-dhikr refers to the message or the reminder. Here it means Quran. And بالغيب is عندما يغيب عن الناس لا يراه إلا الله, even in privacy when no one can see him except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So only believers will benefit from the warnings given by Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the two characteristics described in this verse of the believers are those who follow Quran and those who remain conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when they are alone. Another point to note is that having these two qualities lead believers to the forgiveness and a great reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى وَنَكْتُبُ مَا قَدَّمُوا وَآثَارَهُمْ وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. Indeed, it is we who bring the dead to life and record what they have put forth and what they have left behind. And all things we have enumerated in a clear register. Inna nahnu nuhyil mauta. The obvious interpretation is that this verse is describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power to raise the dead on the Day of Judgment. But Ibn Kathir also mentions another meaning in the context of bringing the heart of a disbeliever to life by guiding him to the truth. So that's another interpretation. وَنَكْتُبُ مَا قَدَّمُوا وَآثَارَهُمْ. What does آثَارَهُم mean? مَا سَنُّوهُ وَأَبْقُوهُ مِنْ خَيْرٍ وَشَرٍ. What they established or what is left behind of good or bad after them. All of our actions are being recorded. And not only what we do in our life is recorded, but the consequences of our deeds after our death are also recorded in our books. As it comes in a narration narrated by Abu Juhayfa, radhiyallahu anhu, and Ibn Majah, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, من سن سنة حسنة فعمل بها بعده كان له أجرها ومثل أجورهم من غير أن ينقص من أجورهم شيئا ومن سن سنة سيئة فعمل بها بعده كان عليه وزره ومثل أوزارهم من غير أن ينقص من أوزارهم شيئا. Whoever introduces a good practice that is followed after him will have a reward for that and the equivalent of their reward, without that detracting from their reward in the slightest. Whoever introduces an evil practice that is followed after him will bear the burden of sin for that and the equivalent of their burden of sin without that detracting from their burden in the slightest. In our day and age, there is very little focus on the long-term outcome of our actions. When we are planning something, we are usually evaluating the impact to our worldly life, but generally neglect what may be the consequence of our deeds after we pass away. This is indeed short-sightedness. Let's look at some examples. So, if you celebrate events, pagan events like Halloween and Christmas, and then your children continue this tradition, they wear costumes, go out for trick and treat, and throw Halloween parties. Similarly, you decorate the Christmas tree, join the Santa Claus parade, and exchange gifts on Christmas. And then this practice lives on after you leave this world. Then the sin will be perpetuated for many generations until this tradition is celebrated against your books. Allahu Akbar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from such outcomes. And make us very mindful of what we do today if we start something that is not closer to the spirit of Islam, it's not within the Sharia or guideline of Islam, then we should be very careful not to initiate something that may become a source of sin for us, and we would have no chance to even stop that tradition when we pass away. By contrast, we are encouraged by Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to invest in 3 things that are beneficial to us even after our death. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Muslim, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, إِذَا مَاتَ الْإِنسَانُ إِنْقَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثَةٍ إِلَّا مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ أَوْ عِلْمٍ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ أَوْ وَلَدٍ صَالِحٍ يَدْعُو لَهُ. When a man dies, his acts come to an end, except 3 things: recurring charity, sadaqah jariyah, or knowledge by which people benefit, or a righteous child who prays for him, meaning for the deceased. Towards the end of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. And Imam Mubin means Kitabin Wadihin, وَهُوَ اللَّوْحُ الْمَحْفُوظ. It's the clear book, which is the preserved tablet, meaning everything that exists is precisely recorded in the Lawh Mahfuz. Let's quickly review verses 1 to 12. Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is indeed among the messenger of Allah. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was sent to Arabs as well as the rest of the mankind. And a person is not only judged on his deeds, but also on the good or bad consequences of his actions after his death. And everything that exists is already recorded in the preserved tablet. Stop here, inshallah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم.